Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Wookieecast. Today we're here with Mike Chen, the author of Star Wars Brotherhood and the author of Star Wars Outlaws, The Red Moon. Thank you so much for sitting down with us today.
Thank you for having me. Always happy to talk to the Wook team.
And we appreciate y'all's work so much. It's such an interesting book, kind of based off the video game. How would you say it differed from your experience with Brotherhood, where it didn't have a lot of I guess, something to base off of in terms of video game, you know?
Yeah. So Brotherhood was interesting because like when they approached us with it was like they reached out to my agent and they were like, we know Mike loves Clone Wars, want to do a Clone Wars story. And then it was like, here's the sliver of time between Attack of the Clones and E.K. Johnston's Queen's Hope and the Clone Wars movie. So like that was like, you've only got some like unknown time, but probably like, a few months theoretically. Because you want to bridge that emotional gap of where Obi-Wan and Anakin were, we know so much about their lives already. This was more of like really uncharted territory. Like there we've seen a lot about like the first year after Order 66, but we've seen very little about like the corporate side of things, especially how did big business handle the transition between Empire and Republic. Um and then also when we get to like the underworld, like the middle of the book, like there's not a lot there. Like because it takes place shortly before Solo. And so there was a wide open landscape to play with in terms of like what's the ISB doing, what are the syndicates doing, and trying to link it up with little bits of some of the material that's already been in there, like E.K. Johnston's Crimson Climb is referenced,
Mm.
Solo, and then also having it tie into the Outlaws game itself. So it's very different in terms of just working with kind of different sandboxes. There's it's great working with Obi-Wan and Anakin because we know where they're going, we know what their voices are, we know what we love about them. But it was great playing with this sandbox because it was like the world is there, but these characters are pretty new, and there's still so many open places to go. It's like an open world game. Um, so yeah, they're both Star Wars, but they're both very different from each other.
Pretty interesting what you said about the corporate side of Star Wars getting
Mhm.
involved. Were there any kind of just companies that you were happy to sneak in mentions of that happened to be from other Star Wars works?
I know I mentioned Zerka, which is like, always fun to shout out Knights of the Old Republic. Um, but it was more like I really enjoyed playing with the idea of like, I mean, because we see it in the real world where these companies like, so Barsha Corp, as I jokingly called it in the pitch, they're like space Lockheed. Like they're making cruiser parts, engine parts, light speed parts, all these things that go into ships, that go into military ships, go into commercial ships. And they make so much money and are the backbone of intergalactic travel that like they don't care about the politics of it. Everything is like purely transactional for them about like how do we expand our market share? How do we just get into every ship in the galaxy? Um, and we don't really see that in Star Wars. We have like the Empire, which is like this, monolithic, oppressive government. We have like the Republic, which is, the Republic and its fading pieces. You have like the Jedi Order, which is like the religious monks. And then you have a lot of the underworld. And we've seen snippets of like individual societies, like, this is what the Mandalorians are like, or like this is what the government's like on Naboo. But, the business side of things is usually underworld stuff. And so to see it like on a corporate level, like where and beyond the corporations involved with the separatists, like on a corporate level where like they don't care, they're just going to sell ship parts to whoever. That was really fun to play with, and I feel like very much allegorical to a lot of stuff that's happening in our world right now.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think that kind of corporate mentality influenced how maybe the Barshas raised their children? Because I know
Oh,
Jalen was well, Brencoil was more of a father to me
yeah.
than his actual parents. What was kind of developing that relationship like?
So
Oh.
I mean, I think it's like I've talked about how like I live in the Bay Area and specifically Silicon Valley, and so I am adjacent to a lot of families that are like in like super rich megacorps, and you see the way that they raise their kids is just a little bit different from like middle class, middle lower class, middle upper class, or whatever. Like there's like kind of how 90% of people operate, and then there's like this weird 10% where like it's just like there are times when like I'll go to the park with my daughter or something, and like we'll just like we you can tell who is like from an ultra rich family because of like they're just operating like on this really weird detached different level. And so I figure like that's gonna exist in Star Wars. And it would make sense given the backstory that's established in Outlaws when Jalen and Sliro are talking about like Jalen says like I was the heir and like what is all that about, backfilling all of that, it really makes sense for it to be kind of akin to what we see in the real world with like the ultra rich who like kind of live in their own societies and like farm out parenting duties, emotional duties, and everything is about kind of like grooming towards being part of this business because it's not parent child anymore. It's as transactional as selling ship parts to another manufacturer.
How would you describe the way Jalen had to kind of reinvent himself after the fall of Barsha Corp and moving on to be his own person, not just an heir?
He's I mean he's reborn in a way. Like he's been you see in the first act of the book where he has been boxed in his whole life. And I honestly think that like the way I tried to construct it is that if Sliro was not there, like you see in the opening, see where Jalen's heart is when they're both children. He wants to help his brother. He doesn't know how to, and his parents have kind of boxed him in like with these, lines that say, don't cross this line if you want to get what you want. So he's like being put in like this really horrible position as a young child. But at his core, like I like to think that if both Slero and Jalen went to therapy as adults, like they would have a healthy relationship. Um, but that doesn't happen in Star Wars. But the I feel like Jalen um had enough true brotherly love for Slero that it anchored him, that every time he's asking like why is my brother being treated completely differently? Why is he only getting half of what I get? This makes no sense. And because of that, he doesn't act like the horrible people that you see on the Barsha compound, where they're just like drinking and having a good time and just ignoring everything that's going on. Like he's still grounded in humanity, and I think it's because of his relationship with his brother, which that is ultimately what like leads to his downfall. But when ND5 comes in and goes hitman on everyone, um, I think Jalen is able to reinvent himself because he has enough self-awareness and enough grounding of like there's a bigger galaxy out here rather than just like the sliver of like my billionaire life of what that is. And so I think like that's how he's able to do it because he knows that the way that his family operates is not healthy. It's not correct. He's very resentful of it, and he keeps as a teenager, as a college student, as after he graduates from Dr. Afra's former school, or actually future school, based on the timeline. Um, uh, when he's given all of that, like he just knows that it's not quite right, not what he wants, and he wants something different. But he doesn't know what that is yet because he hasn't been given the life experience for it.
That makes a lot of sense. And to your point about the compound, a lot of them were a bit annoyed that they got all stuck there, but then they just moved on and had a party when they were ready to leave.
Yeah,
So,
that's actually the idea of that. So when we were doing the early talking with Tom, who I think a lot of Wookieepedia people know, and Gabby, who was like the main editor on this. I pitched like the first act as kind of like the Star Wars version of Schitt's Creek, where if you've seen Schitt's Creek, the Rose family is like this really, really rich family, and they lose everything in the first episode, and they get kind of exiled to this small Canadian town of Schitt's Creek, where they develop a heart and a community, which that doesn't happen to to the Barshas. They meet ND5 instead. Um, but like the idea was for them to kind of like get exiled into something like that. And then Tom had the like we were talking about it kind of like conceptually, and Tom's like, yeah, it's like, when like billionaires like they get arrested for fraud or whatever, and they just get like exiled onto like an Italian villa or something like that. I'm like, yes, exactly like that. And so that's where the idea of the Barsha compound built out from.
That's really interesting. You also mentioned that ND5's Hitman scenes, and I know one of our editors was asking, did you have any other ideas in mind if there was more space for ND5 Hitman scenes?
Yeah, it's funny because like I actually have only played one Hitman game, but I have played a lot of Assassin's Creed and Metal Gear Solid. So that's where my mind goes. But like, from I've seen the Hitman reference like many times on different reviews and social media. Um, I I was actually surprised at how dark they let me go, because it's a pretty grim sequence. And like I actually, because we were trying to figure out like what's the tone for the massive murder spree, but also what is it's one of the few like earliest scenes where we have ND's point of view. And so we had to, like, we knew that we were kind of establishing something with how Prose is going to handle a long-term droid point of view over like the duration of an entire book. It's not just a chapter or a short story. So we were looking at it from several different directions, and I wound up writing some sample chapters of that. When we did, like, I actually had more like on-screen deaths, as ND like stalked out different members of the Barsha family. But then we talked about it. We're like, you know, like if this was a different type of book, then we could go there, but it's not totally necessary. So those kind of became like the basis for the exposition that like you hear when they find one of the bodies, and then it's like bent in this position or stuffed in the closet or something. Like those scenes had partially been written or at least conceptualized. But then like we wound up just being like, okay, it's kind of scarier when Jalen just like runs across it. But I did know what actually happened, and how ND did it. And the whole goal was for him to be very like detached. I think I've used the phrase before that killing for an assassin droid is as simple as you or me opening up like Microsoft Excel. It's like part of the job. It's just a task. And so the goal was to like present it that way, but then also take that opportunity to show sort of like his like efficiency thinking about like, okay, well, if this is my goal, I don't want to be detected, so I'm going to tie this person to a chair and throw them in the pool, and they will sink to the bottom. And so it's like looking at it purely from like an efficiency and task oriented perspective. There was in Act Three, and I'm assuming like we're talking spoilers here.
Yes.
Um, so in Act Three, when ND5 and Vivert run off into the Crimson Dawn compound to go after Maid Nureth, um, I had pictured it in my head that like I wanted it to be like a stealth infiltration sequence from the Outlaws game.
Mm.
And so if you look at like what's referenced in there, it's like taking out cameras, like hiding behind objects, and then working together as a team to like take out the guards as they pass. I wasn't When I was mapping it out, I knew that I wanted it to feel like that. But I wasn't quite sure how much space we wanted to actually give like in scene blow by blow of the action. So I had mapped it out, but then we decided that it worked better as more of like an exposition of like Andy like did this and this and this. So we get to like the meaty emotional parts. But it was still important for it to feel very much like the game for people who had played the game.
Yes, I remember failing those levels several times. It's interesting that you said about the droid perspective, though. ND5 also meets other droids kind of periodically throughout the story. Do any of them have kind of tales about how they came about, whether naming or otherwise?
Yeah. So A1 A1 is the protocol droid on the Barsha compound, and that name was very intentional. The idea was that like because you hear Royce and Barsha talk about like, you know, we have to settle for having droids, not, organic servants. Like so she really looks down on droids. Um so going back to like the Schitt's Creek reference, Royston Barsha was modeled after Moira Rose from Schitt's Creek, and so if you've watched Schitt's Creek, you know that Catherine O'Hara like gives her like this really insane, like like definable accent of how she talks. And I wrote Royston Barsha to kind of be like that. And I asked the audiobook narrators, or Jay and Eric, who voiced ND5, and Jalen from the game, to try to perform it like you're doing Moira Rose from Schitt's Creek, which they do, which is pretty awesome. Um, but so more Royston looks down on droids. And so like the whole Barsha family just like, they're just droids. They exist to serve us. So they're basically slaves. And so the idea with A1 is that she is the primary protocol droid. So I would assume that she's one of the first ones they got. They turned her on, and like, she doesn't have an identifier. She just has a function, and they don't bother to name her anything else. So A1 is just like the default, like this first letter of the alphabet, the first number in the number sequence, and that's it, because that's how they look down on droids. Um, the ones that when ND5 goes to the space DMV, um, and he encounters the ex separatist droids. So this was inspired by there's a side quest in Outlaws. I forget the name of it. It's like called the Survivor or something like that, where you come across like an old battle droid, and you try to like, help the poor battle droid find peace, but the battle droid is still fighting the war in their head. Um, and so I knew I wanted to have a space DMV scene. It's one of the first things that I pitched, because I thought like, we had just seen the trailer for Skeleton Crew, and the idea of like space suburbia. I'm like, oh, we haven't really gone there. So that would be really funny to put an assassin droid in there in like the most suburban of locations with like a DMV type of thing. So the SCUR, I think it's like the Sector Central Union Records or something like that. Um, it's based on the DMV that's like 5 miles from my house. Like I go to that DMV, and when I was writing it, like so there's like the overhead, or there's like the PA system that's like announcing the numbers, like now serving number B8, at this window. That's how the California DMV system like, calls people in. And so Jen from from Lucasfilm, in the notes in there, she's like, I've heard this at the DMV before. Um, but so the idea was to have Indy kind of confront like the ridiculousness of the DMV, and also to show that like the Empire has acquired all these assets from the war, and so they've got these droids. They're just repurposing them. They're not doing so with a lot of care,
Mm.
and so that's why like they wind up in a place like this, where they're just kind of like doing record work, but their memories have not totally been wiped. But the names of those two droids are they're named after my daughter. In her third grade class, her class raised pet rats. One of them was named Oreo, and one of them was named Jeremy. And they got adopted by my daughter's closest friend, and my daughter was kind of like the auntie who would come and take care of them too. Like we would take care of them when her friend was on vacation, until they both passed away about a year ago. Because I learned that rats only have like a 2 to 3 year lifespan. And so, just as like originally there were supposed to be mouse droids in there, but eventually like I decided like I needed the like more like the R2 units, because they needed to use like the scomp link and things like that. And so they got bigger in size, but their colors are similar to Oreo and Jeremy, and their designations are basically pulling off of those pet rats, going from there. So they live on through Star Wars.
That's a really neat bit of trivia. And yeah, the space POV
Yeah,
definitely ended up being a cool piece of trivia.
yeah.
How did you end up picking the planet that they were on as the planet to use for that? Because it had appeared in some other stuff, and it's space suburbia kind of. And there's several other planets in the books that also originated from other fun places. I'd love if you could talk about that a bit.
Yeah, it was so the main thing is I knew I want everything kind of had to be close to the Corellian trait spine. And it had to kind of be like in the mid-rim area, because if we were going with the idea that these ISB agents, the ones who are doing like public surveillance in public facing roles, the idea is like they go on rotation after, a certain amount of time, like a year or 2 years, 3 years or whatever. Um, it would make sense for them to have like a sort of regional commitment to those rotations, so that like not only do they know kind of like the infrastructure of ISB and Imperial people working in that area, but also so like culturally, like they know like where would the gangsters hide, or where would like a potential rebel cell be. You can't have them bouncing from one side of the galaxy to the other side of the galaxy, because you would have to essentially reset all that information that they would be working with. So everything is kind of focused on, um, because we know that Barsha Corp was based on Corellia, and they get exiled to like a moon over there, and so like everything that is tied into the downfall of the Barsha family has to be that has to have some ties to that geographic region. So from there, I just kind of started looking at like what are some planets that don't have too much established material on them. I will shout out Kelly Knox, who is the Jedi archivist for all of us Star Wars authors. Like I kept asking her, because she has all like the DK, like the encyclopedia books and the Atlas books and stuff. And so I would like text her and I'd be like, I need a planet that's like kind of around here. Like, do you have any ideas? And then she would like pull out her books and like take a photo and like send it to me, and like I would pick them from there. Um, I did. This was before Andor season 2 came
Hmm.
out, and I originally picked Gorman. Um, on there. And then I got a note back from Lucasfilm. They're like, things are going to happen on Gorman in Andor season 2, so you probably shouldn't use that. And then
Hmm.
when I watched Andor season 2, I turned to my wife and I'm like, I totally understand now why they. But a lot of the other places, like I mean, they were just picked kind of arbitrarily based on what little information I could find, often with suggestions from Kelly Knox.
Interesting. Yeah. Several of the ones that we noticed because Wikipedia has been updating the articles for them were like
Mhm.
Juju, Blutopia, CERN Prime. So it's really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, I wish I could say that there was like more thought going into it other than, but it was really pretty arbitrary. Like I'm just looking more for like geographic, like what makes sense geographically, and then if like I would adapt the story to the climate described in Wikipedia if there was anything already established about it.
That makes a lot of sense. Kind of speaking
I
of
think it's a
thing,
Blutopia, I believe, is mostly a water planet. And so I
yeah.
kind of made this head canon that the Renner family winery there is like so most of the life on Blutopia, I believe, is underwater, but the idea is that several like mammals have kind of exploited and colonized the few islands on there, and that's why it makes for a perfect getaway for like this winery slash resort. So that's not written out anywhere. That's just kind of like my head canon for like what makes this planet make sense.
How do you think Bish, how do I
Bisht,
pronounce it? Bish
Bish
Renner
Renner,
got
yeah.
got into his position? Such an interesting figure.
It, oh, so it made sense to me, like what I was trying to think about with these ISB agents. So they're surveilling different things, and they talk about like they have conversations between the different agents about like how like what are you doing, like so with with Bish's family winery, the idea is that because it's remote and it's on this mostly aquatic land, so there's not a lot of traffic going there, it makes sense that a lot of the syndicates, like the syndicate heads, would use it as a place for meeting. That it's like it's not nearly as dangerous as like a cantina or Coruscant or someplace like that. It's a little bit more isolated. So the idea in my head canon, again, this is not written out anywhere and is free to be overwritten if someone wants to write the story of the Renner family winery. But in my head canon, the idea is like this winery has been in there for several generations. Like that part's established. And because of its location and its accessibility and relative privacy, the syndicates have preferred to use it as a sort of like neutral meeting area, and so the Empire sees an opportunity where they're like, hey, come work for us. We'll do like we'll turn you into an agent, get these kickbacks. All we want you to do is tell us what you hear. When the syndicate heads get drunk and start talking too loudly, you tell us what they hear, and then once every 6 months, you do a data dump with us, and everything's fine. We won't touch your winery.
Mm.
Surveillance like that made a lot of sense to me. And it's kind of like the few snippets that you see of like it's the same thing with Madel Nereth's operating as an accountant. In that way, she can monitor local businesses and see like scope for any signs of illegal activity or rebel activity. The idea is that this comes from watching a lot of spy movies and like espionage type of stuff, which I really, really enjoy. And there's always a cover front, which looks like the most benign thing, the most benign job in the world. And that way you can listen. And so I try to build out these surveillance agents as like, where could they be in positions where people of either power or people of rebellion would let loose a little bit or provide a paper trail of what they're doing.
That's really interesting. And Madel is an especially interesting character as well, with kind of how her arc ended up coming about. Um, I mean, to see it from the ISB's perspective, rather.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, she's like the idea with her is so she goes through different like she has a degree in accounting which exists in Star Wars. Um but the idea is like where are you going to be able to both audit um like syndicate funds as they transfer, as the sort of like the illegal funds move back and forth. Where are you going to have an opportunity to do that? And then also where you're going to be able to monitor for, what small businesses are supporting the rebels, that
mm,
sort of thing. And so you go with um, like establishing many espionage stories and also like real world spy tales where the front is just a really benign business. It should look as boring as possible, and that way people will trust you. But you also want access to sensitive data, which an accountant will get. An accountant will get access to financial records, and from there you can kind of extract where things are going. And so, um, like I think it's funny because I remember like I had a friend in college who like she wanted to become a CPA, and I used to think like that sounds like the most boring thing in the world. But like now that I'm like an adult and and like I've done my taxes and things like that, and like partially yes, it is really, really boring, but it's also kind of really fascinating how
mm.
people like operate their businesses and like what do they do with their money and like where do they put their money and things like that. And so extract that all the way up to a level of like an imperial spy. And you can get a lot of cool stories from that. I hope um like the ISB stuff that was developed. for this book, like it didn't really exist. Like it had to be approved by the story group. But it was just me throwing ideas out there saying like this makes sense. I think like if they're going to surveil it, it would look like this. And I think there's just like it opens the door for so many interesting stories. So I hope someone takes like the model of where these agents were inserted into public view and runs with some stories for them.
Um, Another character that you got to kind of explore was Laurel Amberdeen, kind of getting into all these unique characters that you got to introduce for the first time. I thought if you could talk a little bit about that because I know you've spoken about it in the book Discord a little bit.
Yeah. So there's like the real world aspect of it, and then there's like the in-universe aspect of it. And so for in-universe, I know I needed a slicer, and there's not too many slicers that are known around that time period. And I had like a few other ideas, but like none of them really worked out. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to make this character. Um, and I wanted her personality to be, um, I wanted her to be like Indy's friend. And I think it was really important because this is a story about like toxic relationships. And there's a moment like when Andy and Laurel have like a quiet moment and they're just talking. I wanted Laurel to kind of be like the friend who is trying to tell you that like get rid of your toxic boyfriend. Like, you know, and poor Andy, like just he doesn't get it. He's still developing that like sort of capability of like reading people. But that was the purpose of it like was not only to have like the slicing espionage aspect of it, but to have her kind of be like this good soul that is funny and feels like a good friend even like when you first meet her. And then the real world aspect of it was when I had to name this slicer. So the real Laurel Amberdeen, Laurel, was a writer friend of mine who shared the same literary agent. She was a member of SFWA, Science Fiction Writers Association. Um, and also, she worked for Locus Magazine, which publishes a lot of science fiction short stories based out of Oakland, so right across the bridge from me. And Laurel passed away in January 2025. And so I was actually like drafting this at the time and looking for a name for the character. And it just made sense because Laurel, the real Laurel, in addition to some editorial work at Locus Magazine, she was their IT person. And so, like when I was a web developer, I would wrestle with like the databases on servers to get like the web software installed. And so like we would joke about like the struggles that she was having with like Locus Magazine's Joomla database and things like that. And so I thought it would be funny. I imagine, Laurel is one with the Force now, and I imagine that through the Force, she sees that her character is still dealing with Joomla databases, just the Star Wars version of them. So that's Laurel's backstory, and I hope that she's a fun character, and I hope that she's time period appropriate, so that if there are other underworld stories, I hope someone picks her up and uses her because she's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's always interesting thing with Star Wars when your characters or events or anything else get referenced in future media.
That's the whole plan. Like I mean, we all talk about it like, we're there's no like official text thread or Discord or anything for Star Wars authors, but like, we get to know each other. And I think like whenever there's a project that comes up, like there's usually like someone will text someone and be like, "Hey, can I use one of your characters?" That's actually when so when I requested Kira, I thought it made sense because of she's an Outlaws. Um, and as soon as that was approved, I emailed EK Johnston, and
Mm.
I was like, I'm going to be doing something around the time period of Crimson Climb, and we weren't quite sure if it was going to be before Crimson or before Solo or after Solo, but we knew that like the events of Crimson Climb were going to be pretty close to it. So I asked her like, um, what do you think I should borrow from that and feature in there that would still be affecting Kira emotionally at that point. And I also asked EK Johnston to dress Kira. I said, like, these are the location she's going to be at. this is what she's going to be doing. What do you think she's going to be wearing? And they did that for Brotherhood too. Like all of Padme's outfits in Brotherhood were like E.K. Johnston picked those.
E.K. Johnson's books are very into the fashion because of Padme and everything, so that makes a
Yeah,
lot of sense.
yeah, yeah.
Um, Kind of shifting into two of the characters that you got from the video game, Grenache and Raven Davik, I think. What
Yes.
inspired pulling those from the game?
I thought it would be fun to shout out some of like the random, NPCs. Like they really don't have much in the
Mm,
game. They're just kind of like on their respective locations, and they're both, I believe, like one of them is a contract broker, and I believe one of them works for one of the syndicates and like gives you side quests. And so like they have voice actors, they have, character models in the name, but like they don't really have much of a backstory. They're just kind of there to give you information. But I thought it would be fun to like um because I knew I was going to be pulling um in particular like an encounter with the Huts. And so Raven is comes from Tatooine. So I picked one of the NPCs on Tatooine. In my head canon, like because I believe he was a contract broker, like but not necessarily associated with the Huts in the
mm,
game. And the game takes place, like what 12 years, I think, after the book, something like
yeah.
that. And so in my head canon, it was that he worked for the Huts for a long time and then he amicably parted with the Huts and now he's just kind of like a general contract broker that sometimes works with the Huts but isn't employed by the Huts anymore. And so it was just fun to take someone that like is started with the game and plant them in sort of like the game related material. And then Grenache, like I was looking through the different NPCs and contract brokers, and he's a Trandoshan and he looks really badass. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna
Mm.
give him a badass story. I'm gonna make everyone afraid of him. And that's basically just trying to have a little bit of fun with these characters that like when you encounter them in the game there's really not a lot to them because they don't serve a purpose to the story. They're just there to give you side quests. But it was fun to write a little bit of lore for them. And maybe they'll show up again somewhere else. And that would be cool.
Wikipedians love deep pulls like that,
Yeah,
so we're
I do
always
too.
happy.
That's why I do it.
You you at times keep a whole list of everything that you've kind of been able to pull together. Do you have any
Yeah.
particular favorites that you
Uh,
have in there?
um, oh boy, let me think.
I know it's a big question, but
Yeah, no, so like what I will say is like I've been waiting for it to be like post-launch for a few months. I have
mm.
my spreadsheet. I had a spreadsheet for Brotherhood, and I did like back when we were all on Twitter, I did a big thread of that, and a bunch of it wound up on Wookieepedia. And I plan to do the same thing with Low Red Moon. I think it's 189 items.
Oh,
So it's like it's Easter eggs, references, and just like inspiration or ideas. Um, like the how and why of the places or people or objects or whatever. And so at some point over the next few months, I plan to actually unroll that on Blue Sky. So plenty of material for the Wikipedia team to go through. I'm trying to think of like anything that was like I mean, like the big one for me was getting Mill and Vivert in there, like because that was not originally part of the plan. That was kind of like
mm.
me asking the Lucasfilm team, like, "Hey, can I can I do this for myself, please? That would be really cool." And fortunately, they were okay with it.
It's really fun.
Yeah.
Um, I know you mentioned that there was some kind of stuff that you did have to like that got kind of cut or only segments of it appeared. And I did have a question as we were sitting here just talking about it. Do you remember what characters ended up having like an on-screen death that never got shown and then it resulted in the got stuffed in a closet or something in its reduced
Um,
form?
yeah, I don't remember if I can't remember the names, but it's just like members who are of people who are at the party on the Barsha
Oh.
compound. It was like um I think like I wrote like the actual like hunting down and oh actually you know what it was? So there's the stuff that happens outside and then ND decides because I actually it was we pulled a lot of it back into Jalen's chapter so it could feel like this gradual
Mm.
reveal of really scary things that were happening. But there was an ND chapter where he goes back into the house and he's looking at like the most efficient way to basically kill people, but then to like isolate the family so he can deliver Slero's message. And so he decides to go upstairs first, take out the people upstairs, and then go back down and try to funnel the rest of the people into the dining room where he
Mm.
seals them all off. And so I wrote part of him going back into the house and also some of the stuff upstairs where he like just takes some people out and like stuffs them into a closet or like under the bed, like that type of thing. But then it was like um that got turned into exposition on ND's part, where I think there's like a start of a chapter that kind of explains like how he got there, and it's just like boom, 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 boom. I took out these people, and I think like it works for the character because he's so methodical that it would be like if you got your car repaired and you came home and like you tell your partner about it, and it was like, oh yeah, I got the oil changed and they changed the brakes and that's it. I wanted ND to just kind of like
Yeah.
document that in his own like memory log as like that, except it's killing people and hiding their bodies.
And he doesn't even think much of it because the emotion
Yeah.
isn't there.
There's no morality to it. It's just a task. He's been programmed to do that. That kind of goes back to one of the things we talked about very early on with the story group was like, what do droids actually feel? And the thing, I believe it was Pablo who said this, but it could have been Matt too. But the idea is that they don't have feelings like the way you and I have feelings, but they have purpose in program. And so they're always trying to fulfill that purpose. So if you're a droid built to fight in the Clone Wars and the Clone Wars don't exist anymore, then what is your purpose? And it's going to create this sort of like dissonance and confusion that is leading ND to kind of question who he is. And it really is a mirror to Jalen, who has been programmed by his parents. Same thing, really, whether you're programmed by the separatists on Geonosis or you're programmed by your parents on Corellia. Um, but the context of his programming has been completely shattered. And so he has to rediscover who he is. And so that's really like with droids, the idea was to show, that sort of thing where in Act One, that sort of thing is like fulfilling that purpose of like his mission is methodical and it's cold. And then as he starts to become his own self, he's able to add like all these layers of context where like a death has to be justified towards purpose as opposed to like I'm just going to kill people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as he kind of gets a slight bit more personality, I mean, by the time in Outlaws, he does have some, somewhat of a personality.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. What would you say that was the best part about writing their moments together, their banter, so to say, in their relationship?
I think it's always fun writing ND's like his inability to grasp humor or grasp like casual sayings and things like that. Like one of my favorite moments is when Laurel actually calls him a sweetie, and then he's like he has to look it up, and then he goes like I am, like that sort of like affirmation of like, oh, this definition fits who I am to this person. So like yes, um, and so like that sort of thing where like whether it's cultural or person to person, just like ND like kind of not getting it, but because he's like a physically a big scary commando droid who has like this really sexy voice, like all of that juxtaposed together just makes a lot of it really fun to write.
Yeah, for sure. And Jalen's obviously um well, he has the restraining bolt on him, right? So they have a relationship, but it's a power dynamic, which is really
Yes.
interesting because he can just delete all of his stored memories at any given time.
Yeah,
Um,
the idea was to really show that like Jalen is his own worst enemy. And like really like the thing that would have set him free really is to just let Indy do his thing and to like
mm,
let it all go. And they could have been successful and happy together. Um, but because of Jalen has had like so many things both taken away from him emotionally when he's a child and then as a young adult, just kind of like physically taken away from him,
mm,
that he feels the need to hold everything really, really close, even when he knows it's not good for him. And that's the whole point of him wrestling with that across the course of the story. He keeps getting really, really, really close to making the right decision, and then he just backs away. And I think we probably all know someone like that who,
mm.
like, they just can't get out of their own way and they just keep falling into this cycle. And if they just got some therapy, maybe they could finally break it.
Yes, because you can kind of sympathize with him, but he also keeps making very morally questionable decisions over and over
Yeah.
again.
The idea, like, I really wanted the character, like, I wanted the reader to be rooting for Jalen. Like, the idea of doing the prologue with him as a child is to show that, like, this isn't his fault. Like he has been kind of put into this horrible situation, and even though he has all of the physical resources that will make his life great, money and like a cushy home and things like that, it ultimately doesn't matter if your parents just crush your spirit. Um, and so I wanted the reader to like see this small child, and root for him
Mm,
and root for him to keep getting close. And he's just almost there. And because so many horrible things have happened to him, like the idea that Sliro is like his one true connection to like authentic love. And then to find out that Sliro is the one who could not get over it and ordered the murder of everyone that he knew, and him. Um, that's like the one thing that like just causes him to snap and like everything just shuts off, like that one tiny little sliver of like authentic human emotion and love is just snuffed out by that.
mm. How did the concept for Sliro's arc kind of come about? I know some of it was influenced by dialogue from the game that had to be filled in, but there was still a lot of room to explore.
Yeah, it was I mean, I just try to think of like what would drive someone, like it's established in the game that Sliro orchestrated like the death of like everyone in the family and the takedown of the Barsha corporation. So it was like what would drive someone to do that? And like I don't want to like hearken to serial killers, but like if you look at like you know historically what happens to someone, like they're so traumatized as a child, their sense of like secure attachment to other people just does not exist, and so it's been stuffed down so hard in them that it just eventually pressurizes and breaks. And so that's really what happened to Slur here. I thought it was funny. I saw some reviews where like readers were like, Zero was justified, man. Like, and I'm like, yeah, he really kind of is. I mean, like, you really shouldn't kill people, but like maybe if he took down Barsha and threw them into like jail or something. But I mean, he tried to do that, and that's what he talks about at the end is like because the Barsha family is so rich and so powerful that like even with all of this evidence on them and all of like this moral justification of like like they should get punished for what they've done, and they just escape it. And that's what causes Sliro to snap, like the idea that like I cannot create any sense of justice unless I physically deliver it myself.
Mm,
And I think it's one of those things where like you want the reader to think like it's like that one reviewer said like, yeah, you go, Slero. You kind of deserve that because Roysum and Nidal are not good people.
Yeah, for sure. If there was one thing that you could tell people to encourage them to pick up a copy of Low Red Moon, what would you say?
I would say so. There's like it's written for a broad audience. It works as a standalone. So I would say like if you're interested in like how the ISB works, between the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy, or like around the time of Solo, that's one avenue in. If you're like looking for an underworld story, I mean, this is an underworld story. You get a lot of how the syndicates are kind of navigating around each other. And then also, if you played the game, and you just want more time with a big sexy droid, that's that's a lot of it too. And especially like if you're a fan of the game, listen to the audiobook because the audiobook really feels like a DLC with Jay and Eric narrating it, and like they modulate like when ND has dialogue, they modulate it so he sounds exactly like in the game, and then you hear him like Jay the narrator still kind of um, making his intonation like ND5, but it's not processed. So it's kind of like you're in ND5's head. And then
Mm.
Eric, talking with Eric, he was like, he said it was felt so easy to get back into the character, but then also he understands Jalen so much more now. And so like
Mm.
when you hear like the dialogue, it's like, it's a performance and it's a really smooth performance between that lot ties the book to the game. So it's it's a lot of those different things. I think there's a little bit of something for different types of Star Wars fans. Like if you're only into Jedi, like if you're only into like High Republic, like then it probably isn't for you. But if you liked Crimson Climb and you liked Solo and you liked Andor, I think like this will work for you.
Sounds amazing. I know most of Wikipedians have read it, so it's good stuff. If people would like to catch up with you and your future works, where can they find you online?
I am so my website is mikechenbooks.com. For social media, I am mostly on Blue Sky. My handle is Mike Chen Writer. There's a lot of people named Mike Chen on the planet, so you have to include Mike Chen Writer. Um, and on Instagram, I'm also Mike Chen Writer, but Instagram is mostly pictures of my dog. So because I don't know how to use Instagram really well, so that you'll get like my covers, my book covers, and my dog. That's basically it. But yeah, I'm mostly there. And I'm always happy to like answer questions about any of my work or just to talk about Star Wars or Star Trek or the other things that I really love.
Of course. Thank you so much for sitting down with us today. It's been so much fun and got to learn a lot of like deep dive into the book.
Okay, thank you so much for having me.